Have you ever really stopped to think about the trust we place in medical devices? I mean, everything from like a simple elastic bandage you wrap around your ankle to these incredibly complex heart devices implanted inside us. We just sort of expect them to work, to be safe, to be effective. But how do we actually know? How is that trust truly earned?
Yeah, it's definitely not magic.
Yeah,
It's a profound, really multi-layered regulatory system, specifically designed, for your safety.
exactly. And that's what we're here to do today, right? In this
Right?
deep dive.
Precisely. We want to pull back the curtain on that system. We're going to unpack the FDA's whole approach to classifying medical devices, and then kind of walk through the rigorous pathways manufacturers have to follow to get these devices actually cleared or approved for market.
Yeah, we're aiming to cut through some of that complexity, demystify things like substantial equivalence, and really detail the different routes, the 510K, the PMA, the de novo pathway. The goal is for you, our listener, to get a really clear understanding of the scrutiny these devices go through and why it matters so much.
Okay, so it's incredible how varied medical devices are. But the FDA doesn't treat them all the same, which makes sense. It's all based on risk, isn't it? How does that breakdown work?
It absolutely is. The key thing to grasp is this tiered risk-based classification system. Basically, devices fall into class 1, class 2, or class 3. And it's simple logic. The higher the class, the greater the potential risk to patients.
Right.
And therefore, the tougher their regulatory controls. It's about matching the oversight to the potential harm.
Okay, let's start at the bottom then. Class 1, low risk. What does that entail? Right, Class I devices are the lowest risk category. They're subject to what the FDA calls general controls. Think of general controls as like the universal baseline rules. They apply to all devices. They cover things like the quality system regulation, that's 21 CFR Part 820, basically the FDA's rule book for how manufacturers design, build, and monitor devices. Plus, strict rules for labeling, 21 CFR Part 801, and reporting serious problems, which is medical device reporting Part 803.
Okay, baseline rules. And what kind of things fall into class 1? Give us some examples.
Sure. Often things you might not even think of as, heavily regulated. We're talking tongue depressors, surgical scissors, elastic bandages, pretty common stuff. But also things like pipetting systems for labs, anesthesia breathing circuits, even X-ray film.
Huh.
Yeah, and many of these Class I devices are actually exempt from needing that pre-market notification, the 510K we mentioned. But, and this is important, they're not off the hook completely. They still need to follow parts of the quality system rules. Specifically, Section 820.1A0 for general records and 820.198 for complaint files. Some also need design controls and post-market vigilance.
Wow. Okay, so even for a simple tongue depressor, there's still oversight and a paper trail.
Exactly. Even the simplest things operate within this regulated system.
Which makes sense. But obviously the stakes go up. What about the next level, class 2?
Right. Class 2 devices. These pose a moderate risk. And because the risk is higher, they need something more than just general controls. They need special controls.
Special controls. Okay,
Yeah.
what does that mean in practice?
Well, it's not a single thing. Special controls are tailored to the device type. They might include mandatory performance standards, special labeling requirements to ensure safe use, maybe rules about post-market surveillance, tracking how the device performs out in the real world. And they often have to follow specific FDA guidance documents, too.
So extra requirements specific to the device layered on top of the basics. What are some examples of class 2 devices?
Good examples would be certain diagnostic tests, like choleoglycine test systems for liver issues or chymotrypsin tests for pancreatic problems. Also, things like CPAP machines, positive airway pressure delivery systems for sleep apnea. Those are class 2. And it can get really specific. Take HIV diagnostic tests like the HIV NAT tests. They're class 2. But they require incredibly detailed labeling, plus extensive analytical and clinical performance data. That detail is the special control.
Gotcha, that makes sense. So that leaves class 3, the top of the pyramid, high risk. What defines these?
Class 3 is for the highest risk devices. We're talking devices that support or sustain human life. Or they're super important in preventing, serious health impairment. Or they just present a potential unreasonable risk of illness or injury.
And because the risk is so high?
They always require the most stringent review pathway. Pre-market approval, PMA, no exceptions. This is really the FDA's highest bar for proving safety and effectiveness.
I imagine the examples here are pretty critical devices.
Absolutely. Think about things like absorbable hemostatic agents or dressings used in surgery to stop bleeding fast or certain types of artificial hip joints. These are explicitly called out as needing PMA before they can be sold. The potential impact on a patient is just too significant to rely on anything less. The stakes are definitely highest here.
Okay, so that classification system based on risk seems pretty clear. Class 1, 2, 3, general controls, special controls, PMA. Now, the big question for manufacturers, how do you actually get your device to the market? Let's talk pathways. Starting with the 510K, that seems really common for Class 2.
It is. The 510K pre-market notification is the main route for most Class 2 devices, and even some Class I devices that aren't exempt. The whole point of a 510K is for the manufacturer to show the FDA that their new device is substantially equivalent to a device that's already legally on the market. And that existing device has a name. It's called the predicate device.
Substantial equivalence, that sounds like the key phrase here. What does the FDA actually look for? How do they define that?
Right, it boils down to two main criteria. First, the new device has to have the exact same intended use as the predicate device it's being compared to. And second, it needs to either have the same technological characteristics as the predicate, or if the tech is different, maybe different materials, a new design feature, different energy source, whatever the manufacturer has to provide data. And that data, potentially including clinical data if the FDA thinks it's needed, has to prove the new device is just as safe and effective as the predicate.
Ah, okay, so it doesn't have to be identical, just equivalent in safety and effectiveness for that specific use.
Exactly. It's not about being a carbon copy.
You know, that concept, a substantial equivalence, it feels like a really practical approach. Without it, imagine every tiny tweak, every slightly different material or software update needing years of clinical trials. It could really slow down innovation.
That's a great point. It allows for safe iteration and improvement without starting from scratch every single time.
And I bet the paperwork for this is intense. Documentation must be key.
Oh, absolutely critical.
Yeah.
The design history file, the DHF, is hugely important for a 510K. Think of the DHF as the device's biography. From the first concept sketch, through all the design changes, the testing, the validation, it all has to be in there. It's the proof of the design process, showing you followed design controls, verify the design, validated it. If it's not documented in the DHF, regulatorily speaking, it didn't happen.
Makes sense. Record keeping is paramount. Okay, but what about those Class 3 devices, the high-stakes ones we talked about? They don't use 510K. They need pre-market approval, PMA. How different is that process?
Oh, it's a world of difference. PMA is, hands down, the most stringent review pathway, reserved only for those Class 3 devices. The review itself happens in stages, and it's incredibly thorough. It starts with an administrative review. Basically, the FDA checks if the application is even complete, if it meets all the requirements in the regulations, like Section 814.20. They're pretty strict. They can actually refuse to even file the PMA if it's missing stuff. Or, interestingly, if you also have a 510K pending for the same device.
Okay, so a gatekeeping check first. Then what?
Then comes the deep dive, the scientific review. This is where FDA experts meticulously pore over all the data to evaluate the device's safety and effectiveness. And manufacturers have to provide extensive data. We're usually talking data from large, well-controlled clinical trials plus other relevant studies. It's a massive undertaking for the company. Years of work, often huge expense. You really have to prove your case with solid scientific evidence.
And isn't there usually an advisory committee involved too? Maybe a public meeting?
Yes, often there is. For many PMAs, the FDA sends the application, or key parts of it, to an independent advisory committee. These committees are made up of outside experts. They review the data, often discuss it in a public meeting, and then give their recommendations back to the FDA. It adds another layer of scrutiny and transparency.
And then the final decision.
Right. The FDA makes the final regulatory decision. If they approve it, they issue an official PMA approval order. Sometimes that approval comes with conditions, like requiring specific changes to the labeling. And importantly, the approval is made public. There's usually a notice and a summary of the safety and effectiveness data available for anyone to see.
That transparency is good. What if something goes wrong after a PMA device is approved?
The FDA has tools for that too. If they get information suggesting a device might be causing serious harm or death, they can actually initiate a regulatory hearing. The outcome of that hearing could be in order to temporarily suspend the PMA approval. It's a serious measure for urgent public health protection.
Okay, that covers the high-risk path, but what about new types of devices, stuff that's innovative, maybe low or moderate risk, but there's just nothing like it already on the market? No predicate device exists, so a 510K isn't possible. But maybe it's not risky enough for a full PMA. What happens then?
That's exactly where the de novo pathway comes in. It's designed specifically for that situation. It's for novel, low to moderate risk devices where there's no existing predicate. Essentially, it allows the FDA to classify a totally new type of device and set the requirements for it. If the manufacturer meets the criteria, the FDA grants the de novo request, creating a new classification and clearing the way for the device. It stops new, lower-risk tech from getting stuck.
That's smart. Keeps innovation moving. Now, what about devices before they even get to any of these pathways, when they're still being tested, maybe in clinical trials?
Ah, right. That's governed by investigational device exemptions, or IDEs. That's under 21 CFR Part 812. An approved IDE basically gives permission to ship and use a device for clinical investigation purposes, even if it would normally need a PMA or meet some other standard. It's essential for gathering the clinical data you need for a future PMA or maybe even a 510K without breaking the rules before it's approved.
And I assume there are different levels of scrutiny for these trials, too.
Yes, definitely. The FDA distinguishes between significant risk and non-significant risk device studies. Studies with significant risk devices generally need formal IDE approval directly from the FDA, plus approval from an institutional review board, or IRB, at the study site. For non-significant risk studies, you might only need the IRB approval, assuming you meet certain conditions and label the device correctly for investigational use.
But even if it's investigational, quality still matters, right?
Absolutely critical. Even devices under an IDE must comply with design controls, part of that quality system regulation we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
It just highlights that good quality engineering, careful design, proper documentation is required throughout the entire device lifecycle, from the very beginning, even in the lab, through clinical trials and into manufacturing. Patient safety and data integrity depend on it.
Okay, we've covered a lot: classifications, pathways like 500K, PMA, de novo, IDEs. Let's zoom out a bit. Why should you, our listener, really care about all these, sometimes arcane-sounding regulations?
Well, at the end of the day, it all comes back to one thing: patient safety and device effectiveness.
Yeah.
Every single one of these rules, the classification system, the pre-market reviews, even things we haven't detailed as much like post-market surveillance under Part 822, where the FDA tracks devices after launch.
Right.
It's all fundamentally about making sure the medical devices you encounter, the ones doctors use, the ones maybe implanted in you or a loved one, are actually safe and that they work, that they do what they're supposed to do effectively.
So they're not just bureaucratic hoops, they're the safety net, the invisible shield working for us.
Exactly. And for the manufacturers, the absolute foundation for all of this is having a solid quality management system, or QMS. We mentioned 21 CFR Part 820, the quality system regulation. That's the core of it in the U.S. Internationally, you hear about ISO 13485. This QMS isn't just like paperwork. It's the whole system for ensuring quality, from how you design the device, source materials, manufacture it, test it, handle complaints, everything. If you don't have a compliant QMS, you can face serious regulatory action. It really forces quality to be built in.
And I guess that ties back to the documentation you mentioned earlier, the DHF and other records.
Precisely. Documentation is the evidence. Things like the device master record, or DMR, that's the recipe, the blueprint for how to build a device consistently. Then the device history record, the DHR, that's the proof you actually followed the recipe for each batch or unit you made. And the design history file, the DHF, tracks the whole design journey. Together, they are the essential records that prove compliance and ensure consistency batch after batch, year after year.
It's the story of the device written down.
You got it. If it wasn't written down from a regulatory standpoint, it might as well have not happened.
Now, we've obviously focused heavily on the U.S. FDA system. Is this unique to the U.S., or do we see similar ideas globally?
That's a really important question, especially for companies today. While every country or region has its own specific regulations, there are global efforts towards harmonization, and you definitely see similar concepts. Take the European Union, for example. Their medical device regulation, the EU MDR, also uses a risk-based classification system. Similar idea. But, and this is key, the details can differ. There are, as one source put it, subtle differences in classification rules. So a device that's maybe a sterile Class I in Europe might actually be bumped up to Class II in the US.
So it's not a perfect one-to-one match.
Not always. Which means manufacturers who want to sell globally have to navigate this carefully. They really need to assess their device classifications separately for each major region, the US, Europe, Canada, wherever they plan to market. It adds complexity for sure. It's this constant interplay between national rules and the global nature of the medical device industry.
Fascinating. So it really is a complex web, isn't it? From the simplest bandage to the most advanced implant, there's this deep, intricate system working behind the scenes. Understanding even a bit of this regulatory landscape gives you a whole new appreciation for the safeguards that are in place for all of us.
It really does. It shows how much effort goes into balancing innovation with ensuring public health and safety.
Absolutely. It makes you think about that little symbol or marking on a medical device differently, knowing the journey it represents. So, thinking ahead, as technology just keeps accelerating, we're seeing more complex devices, maybe more connected devices, AI-driven devices. What new challenges do you think these FDA pathways classification, 510K, PMA, de novo might face in the future? How do they keep balancing that need for rapid innovation with rigorous patient safety?